This is the AI Advantage podcast, where we explore how AI is shaping professional services. Accounting has always been about trust. The numbers have to be right. Now, AI agent is reconciling bank transactions, predicting when clients will pay, and generating invoices from a WhatsApp message. My guest today is Abhi, product leader at Xero. Let's learn the backstory of how it is happening. Welcome to the AI Advantage.
Hi, Baker. Happy to be here.
You've shipped AI products at many great companies, HackerRank, where you were matching engineers to roles, at LinkedIn, surfacing opportunities, and at Shopify. Can you talk about how AI has evolved over the last 5 years?
Definitely. I think in a very simplistic way, AI has moved from being applied to very specific problems, very deterministic problems. AI used to be very deterministic. It still is, but it also has evolved in its applications to non-deterministic use cases. What that means is that AI can now be applied to pretty much anything and everything. It's a lot more probabilistic. And so, yeah, I think the number of users has increased. But what that means is that what we consider AI these days, which is typically generative AI, the accuracy has taken a hit. Now, things can be improved. There are ways and means in which you can improve even those. But largely, when we talk about AI and when we talk about LLMs, what we really mean is that it's a more non-deterministic application, which means that it can be a little less accurate depending on how you use it.
Can you give a few examples that from your past experience? What does deterministic mean? What does non-deterministic mean? Because not everybody understands like how it is different from the past to now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the great examples of how AI has been used, all of us use some social media these days in some shape or form, whether you use Instagram, whether you use Facebook, whether Meta, whichever you use. A lot of times when you see the feed is very much built in a very deterministic way. What it means is that it will take in certain signals and then it will accurately try to predict, hey, is Baker is interested in these specific aspects? Let me show this content to that particular user. We did that at LinkedIn. Where I used to manage the profile team at LinkedIn. And you see this on the side of your profile, you'll see these people who you may know. That little widget, a lot of it is actually done through AI, what we used to be called as very typical deterministic AI. And when I say deterministic, it means that we can still tune the accuracy, we can still tune the projections, but it is, for the lack of a better word, it is not open-ended. It is like it's tied to a specific goal, and that's where the deterministicness comes out of it.
Is it fair to say that for the same set of inputs, you might get a similar output?
That's one way to put it. Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Can you now tell about like for the same set of inputs, you get different outputs? Like where do you see that happening and why is it so undeterministic? And how does this probabilistic way of things has opened up more use cases? What sort of use cases have opened up?
The best analogy here is an analogy if you compare determinism with machines, where you have a very predictable outcome. The machines could take in a bunch of inputs, but they produce a specific set of outcomes versus human, in which if you feed the same set of information to one human, you may not get the same behavior out of that human versus if you give that same set of information to someone else. Because the learning is different, right? The learning is from a really broad set of inputs, and the way the interpretation has happened, the way the person thinks is different. And so if you apply that sort of non-determinism to models, which is what we see with large language models, you will end up getting, based on the outcomes and based on the learning, you will end up getting a slightly different interpretation because it works on a bunch of weights, and the weights can be different between different models. Even for the same model, the weights applied can actually change because the context doesn't almost always exactly remain the same as well. So it can change. Now, your question about how this actually opens up to many different users, to broad set of users, is because just as you can, just because outcomes are the outcomes are fairly non-deterministic, you could potentially apply, if you think about this as if you replace this LLM, this model with, say, if there was a human behind it, you can basically say, hey, I'm going to give you a bunch of inputs. And what you come up with is open-ended. It's based on the questions I ask, it's based on the inputs I give, which is what we call prompting now, which is like, hey, I could phrase the question, are you going to market? Or I could phrase the question, when are you going to go to market? I think these are different questions, but they are in a similar kind of space, and you can get different answers based on that. And so the application, because it's open-ended, it actually opens itself to a bunch of different applications. So it could be applied to business use cases like marketing, content generation, pretty much anything and everything can. I think because I've kind of made it close to sound like a human, and a human can technically be placed in anything that we do today. It can be applied to anything, any particular use case today.
Okay. I think let's double click on accounting itself. Historically, when you look at accounting industry, they're always cautious, right? And they adapt technology, but generally slower than some other verticals. When you are and you are working with a whole bunch of small business owners in accounting at accountants at Xero, maybe you can talk about what are the newer use cases that you're working on for accountants and small business owners, and what are the what kind of value are you able to generate, and what kind of issues are you facing with this new AI technology?
So what we are working on is, if I have to if I have to separate the use cases for accounting. So look, first of all, accounting, the stakes are different, right? As you said, that accountants generally, or accounting use cases are really more cautious. I don't think we can afford hallucination to the extent that, let's say, you're generating certain content you may be okay with. For accounting use cases, because you're dealing with finances, it has to be very accurate. So what we do is, based on what we need to do is, basically, if you think of our models and the AI that we created within Xero, we have put constraints on it. On the data that it has access to, we have to make sure that it's trustworthy and so on. Right? We are not breaking the trust when we allow the AI to access our customer data. So we have to make sure that the trust is there. But trust is not in terms of access and security, but we also have to make sure that the outputs are trustworthy. So the AI the models and the changes that we have done for our platform at Xero, what we call JAX largely, which is just as Xero. JAX has been trained and evaluated so that we actually have minimized a lot of these hallucinations, because it's important to maintain that trust, right? And this is how you actually try and control non-deterministic behavior, so that we tune it so that it gives you the results that you need. As far as what we are working on, we are working on a slew of different AI efforts right now. Just as the JAX, we launched a revised JAX assistant last year. This year, we also launched automated bank reconciliation. That was a big win. It's actually showing a huge improvement in productivity gains in accountants on how whoever has adopted it. What we are also doing is, we recently announced a partnership with Anthropic, where we are going to launch. You will now be able to access your Xero data right from Claude, and we're going to expand that to other partners too. So there's a lot of exciting stuff happening. We are also looking at, I wouldn't say that we have launched anything specifically in terms of agentic behavior other than the automated bank rec, but that's an area of investment for Xero. And a lot of our investment is going into AI.
Awesome. Congratulations on the integration with Cloud. I'm assuming that you have an MCP server that you are opening up to all of your customers who are on Cloud. That is so transformational. Like, we use so many MCP servers, just as simple as HubSpot, right? In just one command, there is a lot that you could do with all the data that you have in HubSpot, and I'm sure it's the same with Xero. Let's take one example and unpack it so that we we can bring one of the AI use cases into life. I think you talked about the bank transaction reconciliation. Can you just talk about what is it? What is the problem with it? Why is it really hard to do it? Or people spend a lot of time doing it? And then how does AI come into play? How is it really helping people? And then obviously, where is the man in the middle? Where is the accountant in the middle trying to do the right thing and make sure it doesn't screw up stuff? So can you just walk us through that use case all the way from the problem and how it is improving lives of accountants and small business owners?
Absolutely, yeah. Reconciliation is literally the bread and butter of what keeping the books means, right? So on your left side where you have all your bank feeds, those come through, and then on your right side you have all your transactions, and it's all about making sure, very simplistic way, that we're basically marking the transactions the right categories. There are in your general ledger, right? There are different codes and the codes may be different for different businesses depending on the industry they are in, and now depending on how they actually drive their accounting. There is some level of standardization, just to be clear, in terms of there are certain standard practices on how you can classify certain transactions in a certain way. But largely said, it's a question of pattern recognition, right? It's an exercise in pattern recognition. So you take a particular transaction, let's say you go and purchase some paper, and you may want to, okay, now that clearly wants to go into office supplies. But on the other hand, you may want to, if you are doing meals and travel, some of the travel could be for internal company purposes, some of them could be clients oriented, and you may have different GL codes, which are general ledger codes for different transactions. So you may want to classify them, and every business has their way of doing it. And so what we do is with automated bank rec is essentially look at these transactions and basically looking at your previous patterns on how you have classified your data, predict how these transactions need to be classified. Now, when we have an accuracy or metric behind the scene, which is basically saying that, hey, if this classification, we are like 98% sure that this is in the right spot, then we may just mark that transaction as reconciled. Versus if something is, let's say, 70%, we are sure, then what we will do is we'll mark it with a specific category, but we'll mark it in such a way that, hey, man in the middle, or here in this case, it could be an accountant, it could be a small business, we'll have to go and say, okay, is this rightly classified, or do I need to change it? And if you change it, then we will again use that as our learning for what we do next time. And so this is how the system is learning about your business, but that entire process is fairly personalized to your business. And so that's how it works beautifully. And we are actually seeing a huge productivity gains because it's saving our accountants, our customers, a bunch of time having to go through this manual, tedious tasks. And what we are seeing is actually a lot of them move to saying that, hey, this task is now taking less time. Either I can do more stuff for my the same number of customers, or I actually can go and add more customers to my practice. And so it actually frees them up to do a lot more than they were typically would have been able to do. And by the way,
Awesome.
bear in mind, a lot of this sort of matching, it's not done on a necessarily day-to-day basis. You could be doing it at a specific time in a month when you don't have just one client, you have tons of them, depending on their practice.
Yeah. That's awesome. I've seen many versions of earlier versions of this, like when you were using mint.com or QuickBooks or in other places. There was a time several years ago, it would take everything I had to classify myself every month. Now, majority of them, it gets auto classified, so it saves. And this is again at a personal level, not at a business level, but I'm assuming that it is very similar on this auto classification. Let's double click on what happens behind the scenes, because you mentioned something that is very profound. There is a very high bar of trust that the software has to meet, because you're dealing with peace of mind and trust to your customers. What are the guardrails that you put in place behind the scenes? Maybe few guardrails in layman terms, that will really make sure that whatever is happening is your data quality is right and the guardrails are right. And when it shows up in front of the customer in some interface somewhere, it actually reinforces and builds the trust. What are you doing behind the scenes?
So there are two ways or two or three, a few different ways in which we do that. So first of all, I think that our entire approach towards AI is that about, excuse me, is about how do you make this, it's not about replacing human beings, right? It's not about replacing the work that you necessarily do in the sense that you'll be out of job. Our entire approach is how do we help our customers to be more productive? Like how do we 10x your productivity? And when we think about that, the way we think about experience and the way we think about how do we make sure that you understand what's going on is by basically in some interesting way, it's about looking inward, right? Hey, am I really sure this is the right output of the transaction that we have? As I mentioned earlier, like what you will see this with this, hey, if we are sure, we will actually give feedback that, hey, we reconciled this transaction, we marked it okay. So you know that we have done an automated job at it, right? So it's not like you don't know and just happened behind the scene and you are kind of left in the dark. But where we are not sure, we will actually show that. So essentially you're doing you're doing the same task that you were doing earlier, which was a lot more manual, but now it's simply a click of a button, or like maybe if you're changing the classification, you're doing something else. So that's a really good approach of mutual trust building because look, it's a win-win situation. You get to, as an accountant, you get to scale yourself. You're also getting feedback. You'll get an opportunity to provide input where you don't think that whatever the automated way was doing was either inaccurate or not up to snuff for your practice. But it's a good win for us too, because A, we are helping our customers. B, we can actually now improve our systems so that it actually works even better for you next time, right? So it's like a win-win situation. That's how we think about the user experience. In short, it's really about not doing it. When I say behind the scenes, doesn't mean that you do it in a black box. Behind the scenes just means that you do the hard work, but you do give it back to the customer so that the customer can understand that this is what we did for you and can then react accordingly.
Okay. No, that's great. Like one of the beauties of accounting software is I think there is a lot of good data sets, mostly clean, and you always encourage the man in the middle, and there is a reinforcement of feedback loops that are built in. Now, I think that is a good part, but still it is AI that hallucinates, and it is many times doing anything enterprise grade software comes with a lot of issues. Maybe you can talk about the downside of building an enterprise software, especially where the stakes are so high. Like what sort of things, if I'm a new practitioner coming into play, thinking about building the products, like what are the 2 or 3 things that I should be thinking about to make sure I build an enterprise grade AI software? Because there are a lot of things that could go wrong.
Yeah, I think that so first of all, just make sure there are lots of eval capabilities outside. The market's pretty big. So if you're especially writing some software or you're creating any kind of software for accountants, and I would say this generally applies, like you need to really think about your business and look at your business and say, identify, hey, how am I helping my customers and which parts of my product are super mission critical parts of your product. No company would exist on this earth if it was not providing some minimum, at least exist and be thriving if they're not providing some mission critical service, right? But it's not like everything that you do is not necessarily mission critical. You have to really think about what portion. So in our case, for example, making sure that the data is accurate, making sure that at the end of the day, our business is to provide you with peace of mind, right? So identifying those pieces of business and making sure that those areas are very accurate. So there are many different ways like RAG and training. There are different ways in which you can actually train your models and tune your models so that they actually generate the right output. Now, that takes time, right? Like you can do it for everything. And that's why identifying those mission critical parts of your product are important. But once you do that, spend time to make sure that you actually get to the accuracy that you feel you will be comfortable, like yourself using the product for your own business, for your own skin in the game, right? And I think that is the approach that we take when we look at, hey, whether it's payment systems, whether it's payroll, right? Like at the end, like accounting, like all of these parts at Xero are like super mission critical for running a business. And so we want to make sure that we have, when we work on AI for those particular parts, we are super anal about making sure that they actually work in the right way possible. But then there are other parts of the product. For example, you can send reminders, you can actually compose emails and so on and so forth. Or when you send out those emails, I think we can take a little bit lesser strict output approach with that. And so because at the end of the day, and then finally, I would say lastly, at some like don't go out saying that, hey, this is all working and really fine. Because as we all who have been in software for years know, things behave differently when they're inside your walls and they're very different when they go out in the production and out in the wild. And so just make sure that you you keep man in the middle approach. I think I wouldn't say, I think, but this whole thing of, hey, we're going to just replace all the people, the white collar jobs is just, I think in my opinion, is all that is BS. If anything, I think the jobs are going to evolve.
Yeah. I think you touched on two things which are, I think, equally important for people to hear, and especially our customers are all professional services firms, and so they're all white collar jobs. And the narrative that they hear every day is, hey, in 2 years, no lawyers, no accountants, no recruiters, no engineers, no architects, right? So that is every day, that is the drumbeat that you hear from some of the visionaries of this field. And obviously, what it does is creates a sense of fear of the technology itself instead of thinking about how it's going to really help the business, how it's going to help them be more productive. It actually instills fears like, if I actually adopt it, I might not have a job, right?
Yeah.
And so you talked about it, like, at least from a Xero standpoint, it's all about increasing the productivity of accountants. But if you take one step back outside of your Xero job and purview, can you, as a AI practitioner and having been doing this for more than a decade, and very few people have done that, and you're one of them, like, why do you say that it's not going to come after your white collar jobs, and how it is really transformational in driving productivity than any other piece of technology that is out there? That deeper thought would be helpful for our listeners.
It's a great question. I think that the reality is, on one end, on one extreme, you have this, it's an apocalyptic event. In 2 years, there was this project 27, where that was like, okay, it's end of the world. There's going to be like nukes flying everywhere because AI models are going to start like fighting each other and then basically annihilate the human race. That's a absolute like worst case situation. On the other hand, you see this almost an approach where I don't want to even look at it. I just want to put my blinders on, focus on the job that I'm doing and just do it well, but just not pay attention to all of this. By the way, this has existed for every single industry since, if you think about the last 25, 30 years in my career, and I think yours as well, I'm assuming, Baker, that we went through a dot-com boom, we went through the internet revolution, we went through the mobile revolution, we went through the cloud revolution as well, right? I think when it was internet revolution, there was this notion of, look, now anyone can do anyone's job. People can be like, the world is flat. That was the whole thing at that point in time. A great example was, if anyone can write, your software engineers are going to be all moving to low-cost destinations, and then why do we need? But what in reality, what you have seen is that internet actually spawned off and created a lot more jobs. If you are that corner bookstore who always kind of counted on your maybe 5 mile radius coming to your bookshop to buy books, that got annihilated because the business went to Amazon. But at the same time, if you were enterprising enough and you could say, hey, you know what? Now I can actually look at Amazon and say, it's not just that I have 5 mile radius. Now I can just go anywhere, globally, anywhere. I can sell books to anyone. I can make certain things. And of course, you had to change how your business works. What kind of books are you making available and so on. Maybe you needed to get into content publishing, whatever, right? But you had to think about your business differently to take advantage of that change, that step change that was happening. The
Yeah.
same thing happened with cloud, right? Okay, when people are like, okay, that's a desktop, everything is gonna just no desktop product. But if you could actually change and think about, hey, now if I go and make our my business available, my software available on the cloud, it now increases the options because now I can make it available on mobile. It reduces my cost of management or cost of distribution cost. Now my software is available everywhere. So I'm not saying that it won't replace white collar jobs. AI will replace white collar jobs if you think of white collar jobs as in a very kind of zero sum way, where you're thinking, oh, if I do these 5 tasks, that's my job. Then, and if AI ends up doing 4 out of 5, of course, the question for any company is going to be, why do I need for that one little job that's remaining? Why do I need that person? And why should I pay that person? So, yeah, technically your job is getting replaced. But I would also think of this as an opportunity to reinvent and think differently. I think using the Xero example, I think we as Xero need to recognize that what we recognize, we are in the peace of mind business, right? As a small business owner, I don't want to spend my time thinking about accounting regulation. I want to actually have peace of mind that I've given it to someone and that person is, or that software is doing its job. And so accountants also have to think differently. And the same thing applies to any particular industry. If I'm a marketer, I should be thinking of, look, now I can actually, it's not just that my job is going to go away because content can be easily generated and anyone can just fire off an email. But if I now can think that I can actually generate so many different types of content, I can actually experiment with many different types of modes and approaches. I can build stuff easily. I think that's where I feel like if you rethink, you do again, look inwards, think about what your actual job is, and see then how that you can apply that job differently. How can you create that differently? And I think that we will see a huge mushrooming of opportunities of people who think like that and see and take advantage of that. Than if you are, if you kind of close your windows and say, okay, you know what, I don't want to see this happening at all. So yeah, I'm somewhere. I think I always believe that it's never as bad as it is, as you make it sound like the apocalyptic scenario, or it's never as good as I can just keep doing my job and it's not going to happen to me. I think the truth is always, or the reality is always that it's going to be somewhere in the middle.
That's right. Yeah. One thing that is very clear is like it will have a profound impact on productivity in some shape or form,
Absolutely.
right? And the more you use it, and it's going to take a little while to master for anybody, but once they master it, it's going to open up new opportunities, not for just individuals, but also for businesses that they haven't been able to imagine before. And that is where the true unlock happens, right? So, but it has to be, both of them have to be true, right? To make sure people are motivated that their jobs are going to be okay, and companies are motivated that they have a lot more to unlock than just some cost savings, right? So I think that both of
Exactly.
them have to be true.
In fact, like it's not necessarily, again, not long where 26% of the practices actually
Hmm.
report that they are changing their hiring practices. They are
Hmm.
now looking for skills. Those are beyond like, hey, do you have business advisory skills? Are you eloquent in your communication? Can you make a sale? Can you do all those things? The soft skills are becoming a lot more
More
important now
important.
than like the hard skills, right? So
Yeah,
I think this is the kind of change that people are seeing like, hey, how can I think of this as an opportunity to just think differently, to do things differently? And I think those people will thrive. Those practices and those companies will thrive.
absolutely. And in fact, it's funny you mentioned that. So we say, look, in the age of AI, the technical skills are getting commoditized, right? Which is what you're saying. And so what really matters is that relationship intelligence and the relationship skills that you bring forth. And then, as you said, all professional service firms are in trust business. So like in the end, they need to have the trust with their customers and all the stakeholders involved. So that is all soft skills, and it takes a lot of time to build it. And you can break it in 1 second, but it takes a decade to build it.
Absolutely.
So that becomes harder and harder especially when your technical skill becomes undifferentiated, right? At least in a very generic way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
As a technologist, having you've seen enough of these, and every technologist has their favorites, right? Especially now in the age where there is so many LLMs and everybody has their own favorite. Obviously, the like now it doesn't have to be anything to do with Xero, but just as a AI practitioner, if you take one step back and say, "Hey, look, I love this for this type of task. I use that for that type of task." And when I use this, I watch out for this sort of thing because it does some things great. Sometimes it screws up. So, one or two things do you use the most for your individual productivity? And what are the things that you watch out for whenever AI is trying to help you?
Great question. So I think I'll tell you where, as a product manager, my job is understanding the market, figuring out what's going on, what my customers are saying, but also what's happening from a customer trends perspective, applying that to the job at hand and what I need to do, and then making sure that I'm working with everyone and communicating it with everyone and making sure that the job gets done. And so I actually use Gemini a lot for my initial part where I'm doing deep research, when I'm looking at different market trends, maybe giving it a few docs and trying to understand. And look, at the end, we also are a little bit restricted when it comes to my job, because you have to make sure that we are not using random tools, and we are
That's right.
controlling,
Mhm.
because we don't want our customer data to go anywhere. So that's what I do from a work perspective. We also use Glean as an internal engine, and that's pretty awesome because it sits on top of different LLMs. It's good for if you have a workflow to automate that
Mhm.
particular workflow. Of course, I use Claude. I'm a big fan of Claude for building, prototyping. I can kid you not. I think it used to be that, hey, if I have an idea, I had to go and take like two or three different people and say, hey, can you just do this design for me? Can you just do a prototype for me? Now I can just do all of that on my own. And I can go, and the time from
Mhm.
a thought to a concept is so much reduced that it's just amazing what happens. And as far as I think outside of work, I have Claude, I have Gemini, I have ChatGPT, I use OpenAI quite a bit especially if I want to get a quick answer. I use OpenAI a lot. I use Claude for more deeper answers, as well as Gemini. Gemini, I love to for creating gems. And my wife and I, we have a gem that suggests what should be the menu for our lunch and dinner next week,
Oh, nice.
based
Okay.
on what we have done previously. So it's a very interesting tool, and Google is amazing when it comes to sharing. So we can, if you have more than one person who are collaborating, that's amazing to use. So yeah, I think I have tried Lovable for. So if you actually have an idea that you used to be that Lovable would be really amazing with creating a prototype and so on. Entrepreneur at heart, so I end up coming and building a few things. So I used Lovable at the beginning, but I can do a lot of that with Claude now.
With
I've
cloud.
switched over to Claude quite a bit. So yeah. And as
Are
far as
you?
like, what not to do, I
Mhm.
would say always review your work. I kid you not, like how many times I have written, like even I've gotten documents from people and they're obviously wrong. You can see that they are AI generated. So just like, as with anything that you do, just make sure that you're double checking the work and before you submit the test paper.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that. Whenever I also use a whole bunch of tools like you do. The first version is actually wrong. Probably the 10th
Mhm.
version is probably right. So it takes
Yeah,
10 versions to give more context, reframe it. And what
100%.
people try is they just do a couple of iterations and they think it is great. But it's a skill that it takes a lot of time to give all sorts of context and then making sure it gets critiqued. And then you do quality checks on everything you do. So there is a process that all of us are trying to figure out how to get to an output that is actually good and solid than some output that maybe in 2 seconds you'll get it, but it's like it's not even worth it, right? So I think that is that huge learning curve that all of us are going through. Even for one document which I wrote yesterday, it took me 8 hours, but I really spent so many iterations to get it right. If I didn't
Yeah,
use Claude, it would have taken probably like 2 months to do it. But it
yeah,
took me 8 hours, but it was perfect,
yeah,
right? But it took me
yeah.
that 8 hours of
Okay.
struggle to getting it right. But again, it is so powerful that you need to harness the power in a way that you, in the end, you are in control of the quality of the output that you want to
Exactly.
create, not the other way around.
Exactly. I think I'll give you one trick. I personally haven't applied it too much. I recently, my 14-year-old told me this trick, which is
Mhm.
if you have a outcome in mind, don't start with asking about the outcome to LLM of your choice. Start with asking a prompt. Ask the LLMs to generate a prompt, and then you customize that prompt because then you have a really good starting point. So don't start
Mhm.
with your final sort of workflow. Start with what prompt do you want? Ask LLM for a prompt that can be used that you can then use and revise. Could give another sort of a micro starting point for you. So yeah, I think it's an interesting
Interesting.
advice.
What's more interesting is it's coming from a 14-year-old. That's crazy. Yeah, I know these guys are probably experts than all of us. Yeah, can you also touch on open source models? I know you talked about the premium models. Do you? I've talked to enough people now, but everybody has their favorite one, and sometimes they use it depending on what the use case is. But do you see a whole bunch of companies are using it because of for the cost reasons mostly, and also they're pretty good, right? And you can really tinker with it and fine tune it than let's say a premium model itself. Do you see that happening as you're building enterprise software? Do you see people using it, and if so, where are they using the premium versus the open source?
I personally haven't experimented with them. I haven't really come across a company that's actually used that to the extent. I think, look, you should really take a step back and really decide if this is the place where you want to invest, right? If you think that the only reason I would go and invest in a model is because it's in an industry where the current whatever the models that exist don't necessarily provide the level of clarity or the kind of information that I would need.
Capability.
For example,
Yeah.
if you like developing something for medicine, or maybe as I said, there's a research area where there's not in a lot of these like commercial models, you may want to call it, or even they are kind of built on a large trove of public information, right? Or information that they can get access to. But there is a lot of information that may not be publicly accessible, in which case these models may not be trained. You may have specific data that you exist that you want to train it with, and in which case it makes sense. Now, whether you want to do that on top of an open source versus a commercial model, I honestly don't have a great opinion because I personally haven't tried it or come across somebody using it. Gut tells me that token costs are going down. And so, and they are, I think the shortage there is not because of the models, but because of the capacity. And
Mhm.
so I feel like things are going to keep getting cheaper and cheaper. What I hear is like there's a 7-month cycle in which the models become smarter, and the token costs become cheaper. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of arbitrage potential here. I won't be able to comment whether open source is a better route to go. I think it really depends on the use case.
Yeah. I've heard some powerful use cases where these are some devices doing some vision stuff that like they're in ships. They actually look at
Mm,
some video feeds and have to make real-time security decisions. And so
mm.
and they're on devices that have very low power, very small memories
Oh,
and
that's
stuff.
amazing.
So yeah, so they actually take an open source model, really like very small open source model footprint that consumes very little power, but is extremely efficient in
Mm,
capturing the video signals and then processing that video quickly, saying that hey, that is a problem or that's not a problem. And there are many variations of that, like in let's say engineering. There are specific data sets that you have that is a lot cheaper. I know for companies of zero size, maybe cloud is cheap, but there are other smaller companies that can't afford it. So
yeah.
they use open source model with a particular data set where they train on it and it doesn't cost much. And then when they deploy these things, it basically is more or less free because they're deployed on some edges or some places where you might not have reliable internet or the cost is extremely important for them, right? So there are many of those that are happening. But again, like it's a wild west. Even within open source, there are too many models, right? But it's fascinating to just hear like where people are using it. But one thing is for sure, everybody has their favorite, and whatever your favorite is changing tomorrow, right? Every day
Totally.
it's changing.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And
It's like
today,
it's like looking news every day, right?
yeah,
Hey,
exactly.
what
Yeah.
happened
It's
today?
Opus 4.7 came 2 days ago. Who knows, right? So then Mythos is coming up soon. And every day there is something new. Somebody said this, and it is true. Whatever model you're using is going to be the least performant model as of today. Because anything moving forward is going to be better, right? Because you think it is
Absolutely.
great, 4.7, but that is the least performant. Because something else is coming 2
Absolutely.
weeks from now, and that is going to be better than this.
Absolutely.
So,
By the way, I think
yeah.
it's very interesting. What I have not seen is people talk about somehow the AI, as we started this talk with saying that, hey, what was the AI before? There was some amazing, very, if you're a use case that's still deterministic, we may still want to look at
Yeah,
your traditional or the old
ML. Yeah.
ML
Yeah.
AI. And that was,
Yeah.
makes sense, especially if you want
Yeah.
on a very small client and you want it to be very efficient. It makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, depends on the use
It's
case.
it's actually interesting you said that. I was talking to my head of engineering, and we looked at all the use cases where we could apply AI. And he comes from an NLP company like 15, 20 years ago. They were the market leaders. Microsoft acquired them. So the old forms of AI, right? And he said, look, most of these use cases you're talking about, you could just use some ML and some old forms, and that is good enough for us.
Yeah.
Really, we don't need to use anything new stuff. In fact, a lot of it has to be deterministic. And so you have to use that old stuff, which is great. That's reliable. It's been there for decades. And so we don't have to chase all the new fancy stuff just because it is new, unless it makes sense for that particular use case. And
Exactly.
that is one thing people miss in all of this, saying like it's been there for more than 2 decades. And you've seen this with LinkedIn. LinkedIn has been doing this for so long.
Yeah.
And so did, and we were at Semantic. We would use ML, the old forms of it. So security was always built on the latest stuff, what AI could do, because you always have to process things faster, find patterns, and apply them quickly on the fly, sometimes in the cloud, and create signatures and stuff. A lot of this tech has been used for a while, but the newer forms makes it even, you need to do it even
Yeah.
faster.
Yep.
Yeah, if the bottom line is, look, the toolkit has increased. So you have very reliable set of tools that's been there for decades that you still can use for all the right problems. And then there is this powerful undeterministic toolkit that is also there that you can apply to a whole bunch of problems. So it depends on what is the problem you're trying to solve and what toolkit you want to use. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You may have the biggest and the fanciest power screwdriver, but sometimes you just need to take that Allen wrench out and just use it. That's it. It's as simple as that.
That's
Like,
it.
let's
Absolutely.
don't over engineer it. Yeah.
Yeah. We're back to square one. So that's awesome. Last question for you. Look, we have a lot of accounting clients, and many of them are listening right now. So a lot of them are behind, or they've been to conferences. They're looking at demos of this cool AI tech that is coming up, but they haven't adopted anything yet. What would you tell them on where to start their AI journey?
Yeah. First of all, I would say that to start, right? I think if you have been on the fence, which, by the way, all of us, to your earlier, if you use the latest model, it's probably the least, it's probably the most
Performant model.
inefficient, performant one. Similar to that, it's okay to feel behind because sometimes it's just the news cycle kind of amplifies. I think the reality is that change is happening and you better get on and understand that, hey, this is like change, understand this change and adapt it to your business. So let's, first of all, make sure that you want to get started. Now, what I would recommend is start with the way to think about this is start with the most complex tasks or manually intensive tasks that you have, which are also repeatable, and take those tasks and look at how you can automate them. Right. And so some of the tasks could be, we talked about bank reconciliation, but you could also look at invoicing. You can look at like payment chasing. You could look at insights, cash flow insights, and so on and so forth. Some of those tasks are like reporting. A lot of You may be creating custom reports for your clients or reports that you think are the right way to represent information to clients. Think of those, but those are, if those are actually repeatable tasks. The data may be changing, but the task itself is the same once you have created a particular report. So think about such tasks which are complex but repeatable, and then figure out, hey, how can I automate those that I can free up my time or my team's time and apply it to either more customers, to scaling the business, or applying it to other stuff. So yeah, I will highly, first of all, get started, but second of all, identify such repeatable tasks. And lastly, use tools like Claude or use Jax on top of Xero or any other
Claude.
accounting platform you may be using with Claude, and go for it.
Awesome. Especially now that you have integrated with Claude, I can see the power. People could go and say, hey, tell me what all invoices are due, and then it's going to give me a list of invoices. So you really can just talk to an interface, and then you will get probably most of the answers without even logging in. But the power of what Xero and the platform can do is manifesting itself in the standard workflows and the tools that you already have. On the top of it, you can always go to the product and use Jax to talk to it, right? So I think that is very pervasive in the way that you could realize the impact. Abhi, it's been a fun conversation. Appreciate you taking time, especially on a Sunday. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here, Baker.